morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to stay here today in this Congress. It's my first time in Turkey, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to make this presentation. I want to say just a few words in Turkish. It's very hard for me to speak in Turkish, although I'm trying. So I'm going to say these are the only words I'm going to put. But you can follow on the left side of the screen what I'm going to say in this lecture. What I'm going to do this morning is basically to focus on this outline. First, I'm going to talk about, very briefly, about some examples and key issues on health inequalities and social determinants of health. Then I'm going to spend some time talking on the WHO Commission on Social Determinants of Health, who released a report a couple of years ago, an important report. I'm going to spend a little time talking about the contents and some of the criticisms, positive and negative, that has been raised. And then I'm going to use our own example, the example of the Employment Conditions Network and Barcelona and Konu network. And I'm going to finish with some examples, some issues on the challenge to tackle health inequalities. So I'm going to talk about politics, I'm going to talk a little bit about policies and some methodological challenges. Sometimes I like to start some of my presentations with a screen with a map like that, which is a map of the world in which you can see many things. It's a map of many pictures taken at night, and in these pictures we recognize that there are different worlds. There are the first world, Europe, United States, part of Canada, Japan. Then there is a world which is basically dark, which is Africa, and then there are other countries of the world. It's a map that shows many things. It shows energy, it shows who has the oil, who has the power, who has the economic power, and also is a map that reflects somehow health inequalities. Now we will have a first look to the world, a very broad view of the world. One can see that the distribution of the population in the world is more or less like that. It's Europe, 11% of the population, Africa, 14%, Latin America, 9%, North America, 5%. But when we see the wealth, you see that the picture changes dramatically. Europe has tripled, it's 32% of wealth. Africa diminished, so it's very small right now, it's only 2%. And North America, Central America, but mainly North America is 31%. So it's a huge gap, huge difference between the population and wealth. Now, one can think how this has changed along the years, along the last 50 years. Well, you see in this map how there has been this clear increase in the gross world product per capita that has increased incredibly. Now we have cars, we have machines, we have computers, we have many things, and that has happened in the last half a century. At the same time, we see also that there has been trends in global inequality between countries, very clear, so that, for example, the ratio of the gross domestic product per capita between the rich and the poor, basically in 1980 was 1 to 60, and 25 years later was 115, 120 right now. So it has doubled in 20, 30 years of time. Now, one can change, one can think also in something else, because this picture is really very broad. So one can think what happens inside the countries, within the country. So let's take some examples. For example, let's take some examples. It doesn't matter the years, it's just for the purpose of illustration. Hungary, for example, India, United States, Brazil, and we take quintiles. 20%, 20%, 20%, the distribution of wealth in different countries according to this 20-20-20-20 quintile. And you see that in some cases, for some countries, the distribution is basically linear, where other countries like the United States, a very powerful country, but also a very unequal country, 20%, the richest, gathers more than 45% of the wealth, and in Brazil is even worse. So very huge, very important inequalities within countries. Now, how does this look, how does this reflect on health, this picture of income, of wealth at the global level? One can see from a very broad perspective again that life expectancy at birth worldwide is very different. Some countries have over 80 years of age of life expectancy, Sweden, Japan. Other countries, especially in Africa, Angola, Zambia, have even less than 40. So it's huge, huge difference between different countries. If we make a summary of these two things, one can see in this cartogram that on the upper side we have country size proportional to GDP. The more GDP you are, the more inflated is the country. The less GDP, according to the population, you know, the less size has the country. And you see, for example, again, Japan, Europe, United States. And the lower part, we have child mortality, and here it's completely the opposite. Again, Africa, Asia are very much inflated. Now, let's take a look within countries, what's going on in terms of social indicators and in terms of health indicators. Let's take, for example, the example of the United States. So here you see United States, very big, but what happens within the United States? Okay, United States, for example, if we take an important social and economic indicator, which is poverty, you see, like, poverty is distributed, but not randomly in the country, but here you see that there is this typical known belt of poverty that are mainly located in counties that are very poor, in which most of the people are black and poor black people. How does relate with health? Well, you see here in this picture life expectancy at birth some years ago, and you see that the very same belt, in this very same belt for the 1990, the life expectancy, the average life expectancy was only 60, 69, where other parts of the country, like here, Utah, etc., have almost 80 years. So United States is a country, but within the country there are many countries. Inside the United States, there are many countries. Recent studies show, for example, this study showing that socioeconomic inequalities in the US life expectancy are widening across the last year. So, higher socioeconomic groups experience larger gains in life expectancy than more deprived groups. Actually, in some areas of the country, the difference is very much impressive. For example, if we are in Washington, D.C., life expectancy is about 57 years of age. But few kilometers away in Maryland, in Montgomery County, it's more than 20 years higher than Washington. So that happens in the United States. So when we take the United States as an average, you know, it's not very useful to try to understand what happens in terms of wealth, in terms of health. Another look to the United States. In this case, a very standard type of study. This is income, you see here, income distribution in the United States, and these bars are age-adjusted mortality. A typical view in health inequalities study. Health inequalities study research has shown for many years this standard, typical gradient, a classical example of the health gradient using measures of social stratification. In that case, income, we could take education, we could take many other. And we see that the more richer you are, the more you go from the left to the right, the lower is your mortality, the better is your health. And that happens as a ladder, step, 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 step. It's not only the poor, that's the message. These health inequalities do not happen only in the poor. No, it's poor, but also these people here in the middle, what sometimes people say middle class, have much higher mortality than, for example, this group here. So that's important. That's very, very important. Another example, I'm just putting some examples descriptively. Life expectancy at birth in Europe. Huge difference between the average European Union 15 and Commonwealth independent states, 12 years. And these are some of the most developed areas in the world, United States, Europe. Now, for example, if we take Switzerland or Kazakhstan, 16 years difference within Europe. But the situation is even worse and when we have a closer look inside Europe. For example, let's take Scotland. Scotland, in the upper left side of Europe, in the city of Glasgow city, what happens is that a boy born in Glasgow, suburb of Cowton, can expect to live 54 years. That is 28 years less than a boy from the nearby affluent village of Lency. So it's 28 years difference. In other words, a typical boy who is born in Cowton, in this neighborhood in Glasgow, would have 8 years less life than an average child born in India. And in India, as we know, this is a developing country, we can say, in which a lot of the people lives in very poor conditions. Now, that can be summarized in the words of two politicians. One is Martin Luther King, who time ago said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhuman. Or, for example, another politician in Great Britain, Frank Dobson, said, inequalities in health are the worst of inequalities. There is no worse inequality than knowing that you will die soon because